Okay, well, first, welcome to everybody here, and I want to thank Simone and say it's just been a pleasure to work with him. I think for maybe about 2 years we've been talking about this. Excuse me. So it's really wonderful to see this actually brought to fruition. Since this is being videotaped, I do want to also offer a special thanks to the administrative director of the Department of Hebrew and Judaic Studies at NYU, Madeline Goyko, who hopefully she'll see this, and it'll be a way of thanking her for the tremendous amount of work she put into all of the logistics here. So the papers you're going to hear in the next 2 days are breathtaking in their spatial scope. They come from multiple countries and continents. There will be papers about various places in Europe, Germany, Italy, Poland, the Soviet Union, South America, North America, Southwest Asia, particularly Yemen and Israel. The only thing we're actually missing is Australia and Africa. And we could have had those also, but we were limited by both time and money. This breathtaking geographic scope is testimony, if we need to justify it, to the global nature of Jewish history. Jewish history and culture did not just happen in one place, but transpired either at the same time or over the course of millennia all over the world. Changes, developments, crises, opportunities which originated in one locale played out well beyond the borders of that country and happened everywhere. Jewish history is a case in point, maybe even the best case for thinking about transnationalism. That is, national borders meant a lot, but also meant very little. Much of this was facilitated by migration, and many of these migrations were shaped by trade, a crucial part of Jewish history. Indeed, trade brought Jews, even when they were not migrating from one region to another one, but brought them into contact with various other people, going in and out of lands, both familiar and new. Jews from the entire class structure, from the poorest to the wealthiest, became, we might say, proto-cosmopolitans, learners by necessity of what all sorts of other people, Jew as well as other Jews, what they spoke, what they valued, what they wore, and what they ate. By necessity, a broad view on the Jewish past takes one into multiple geographies, which, although far apart, were all bound together by certain commonalities, which we'll see in the days to come. So what were the commonalities that link Jewish history and allow us to think about the history of Jewish food? Now, Simone has in some ways already alluded to one crucial part of that. So the first is the centrality of loyalty to, and rejection of Jewish law, Jewish canonical texts. Okay, Jews, regardless of where they lived and when they lived, were bound together by a set of key texts which constituted their shared culture. Through these shared texts, they were also bound to the length of Jewish history, and then through food, and through food to food through its laws. These canonical texts, the Torah, that is the Hebrew Bible, particularly the first 5 books, the Talmud, the multi-volumes of commentary on the laws in the Bible, the prayer book, as well as other such works, endowed them, for one thing, with a calendar, which is very different than the calendars of the people among whom they live, and that calendar was based on a set of sacred times, which, regardless of where they were, they knew what these meant. Even when they chose to liberate themselves from these texts and from this calendar, it still shaped their lives. So these canonical Jewish texts, the law,
often referred to as halacha, Jewish law, was one of the binding forces which will hold Jewish history together from, one might say, some moment in antiquity that's not necessarily history because we don't have very many sources, to the present period. Secondly, in one way or another, no matter where Jews were, they experienced a degree of apartness. For nearly all of Jewish history, the vast majority of the Jewish people lived among others, other people who followed different customs, adhered to different religious systems, called themselves something different, followed their lives according to a different calendar, maintained different conceptions of geography, history, belonging, and ate differently. That apartness has multiple implications. Jews always had to negotiate between themselves and the dominant other people around whom they lived, a population which included the dominant insiders, the mainstream of the society, but often other immigrants as well, other newcomers. And in this context, wherever Jews were, they experienced some degree of, we might say, abnormality. Jews encountered these other people, the dominant ones, as well as other others, through a variety of means, including but not limited to trade and physical proximity. In that connection, in that encounter with other people, Jews were involved in a set of negotiations which we could call borrowing. That is, I think this is a word that's now discarded by contemporary anthropologists, but I think one that works. That is, wherever they went, they saw what other people did, they borrowed from other people's cultures, including other people's food systems, they picked and they chose among the elements of those surrounding cultures and grafted them into their own. Let me offer one food example. So in the middle of the 19th century, a fairly substantial number of Central and East European Jews in their great migration to the United States settled in the town of Baltimore in Maryland, sort of a mid-Atlantic state. And Baltimore, if it had a national food, or a food that was kind of the core of public food experiences, it was crab cakes. You can even still see T-shirts that say Maryland is for crabs. Well, Jews cannot eat crab. Crab is one of the forbidden foods. So Baltimore Jews, seeing that everybody else was eating crab cakes, and perhaps seeing those crab cakes, maybe smelling those crab cakes, decided that they wanted them too, but they didn't violate their laws, but rather took a totally kosher fish, cod, fashioned the cod into cod cakes, which they called Coddies. And so everybody else could eat their crab cakes, the Baltimore Jews could eat their Coddies. So they, wherever, whenever, exercised some degree of agency in terms of what they choose to incorporate from their neighbors. That is, they liked the idea of crab cakes, but they resisted the crab within the crab cakes and made it into Coddies. So they had agency to accept or to resist. How, they asked themselves, could they cobble together a cultural repertoire that reflected both what they knew, what they considered mandatory, sacred, authentically theirs, and what they could incorporate from the surrounding society, and we might say Judaize it, make it Jewish. This negotiation led to multiple, constant, ceaseless internal Jewish arguments as to where was the line, from what could be accepted from the outside and what could not. So in a number of synagogue cookbooks in Baltimore, the Coddies were called imitation crab cake. And some individuals, particularly the rabbis in those congregations, said, you cannot even use the word crab, you must call them Coddies. So that others said, no, there's no reason to not use the word artificial crab cake, because artificial is indicates that it's not crab. So they had the ability to make these decisions. They fought with each other over them, but yet this was power that was in their hands to decide. But on the other hand, there were often many moments in their long history that they had no choice in this. Expulsions, persecutions, all took place, and while they took place probably less often than Jewish historians and Jewish historical memory suggests, these persecutions and expulsions did happen. Likewise, state actors played havoc in one way or another at various times with the internal life of the Jews, vis-a-vis their language, their marriage laws, burial, and the like. And just as a preview for the papers, some of the papers that we're going to hear, when states began to make kosher slaughtering impossible or difficult, and I think this is something that's going on in Europe right now, those states set in motion forces which helped either alienate the Jews from their tradition or push the Jews into some form of resistance, direct or indirect. So we have these canonical works which shape Jewish history and Jewish culture, food included. We have their apartness, that they're always in negotiation with others who are very different to themselves. Thirdly, global Jewish history has been built on the reality of migration as a theme that links the ancient world to the contemporary. Whether they migrated positively, that is in search of better opportunities to go someplace else, wherever, or if they did not so much migrate or were expelled from their homes, Jews have historically been a people on the move. Okay, there's an influential article in American history describing Americans as people engaged in this geographic migration within the country, and that particular historian came up with a term called the M factor, the moving factor, the mobility factor. We can use that for Jewish history, also shaped by the M factor. These migrations planted Jews in all the places that we'll be hearing about in the next 2 days, and so many more, a much larger number than we can possibly list. In each place that they came to, whether as eager migrants, interested and avid to take advantage of new opportunities and resources, or whether as traumatized exiles bemoaning their fate and mourning for the place that they had just left, they faced several obstacles which manifested themselves in their food lives. For one thing, in all the places they went, they met new others. Now, in the places they had left, they had always engaged with the surrounding people who spoke a particular language or languages. They were cognizant of particular religious traditions, specific government structures, and specific foods. When they left, for example, Portugal in the 17th century and came to, as an example, the Netherlands, they had to learn a new language, they had to learn Dutch, they had to confront a new dominant religion, Protestantism, and yes, they had to learn something about the new food realities of the place they went to in terms of ingredients and formats. In these new places, they also ended up meeting other kinds of Jews, Jews whom they had never encountered before. Adherents to the same religious system, committed to the same sacred texts, but who were different in terms of co-language, dress, attitude, histories, and food. So to continue with the example I offered just before, Portuguese Jews, Sephardim, who came to Amsterdam, met there not only adherents of the Dutch Reform religion, but they met Jews from Poland, Ashkenazim, so similar to them, and yet, to be a little trite, so different at the same time. Every destination setting for Jewish migrants, wherever, whenever, functioned as an internal Jewish melting pot. Okay, where Jews from different places met up with, interacted, squabbled, competed, disliked, and liked, and negotiated with each other. What they had in common, besides their holidays, their prayers, their adherence to the law, was in fact their apartness from the dominant non-Jewish population, and that is the people around them. Okay. Finally, in terms of these broad cultural themes, which will then influence the way in which they dealt with food, I think we can list a fourth, which was that Jewish communal obligations played a important role in shaping Jewish community life. Jewish canonical texts, again, the corpus of what we call Judaism, the Torah, the Talmud, the commentary, and so on, as well as Jews' apartness, whether mandated by the larger society, for example, the ghetto, or if self-segregation, created the reality that, for one thing, some Jews economically did better than others in any one place, creating an internal Jewish class divide. There were rich Jews and there were very poor Jews. Usually the latter predominated, and people in the middle. This class reality was then overlaid the fact that there was a communal obligation of those with resources, those who had, considered themselves responsible for those who did not. The oft-quoted line from the Talmud is, all of Israel are responsible one to the other. So whether that assistance within the community was given in a grudging manner, condescending, patronizing, skimpy, or if it was given generously or wholeheartedly, imbued with a sense of the worth of the recipient, wherever Jews went, they created a kind of internal mini welfare state, which offered a floor below which nobody could go. So these four principles are overarching to all of Jewish history, and so let me turn in the minutes left to food within it. Food for Jews meant more than calories for survival. Okay? It wasn't just stoking the body to get it moving so it could work and sleep and then get back to work. It transcended pleasure. Okay? Jewish culture emphasizes food as a highly pleasurable phenomenon, which I'll come back to in a second, but it was more than that. In fact, food within Jewish culture was more than important. It wasn't just important. For rich and poor, regardless of time or place, food in the Judaic system stood squarely in the center of the sacred zone. Food was not important, it was central. It articulated in terms of who eats what, with whom, under what circumstances, the most important language in which Jews conceived and conducted social relations among themselves and between themselves and God. Food embodied a palpable manifestation of Jewish conceptions of the divine. It functioned as a blueprint for human relationships instituted by the texts that were assumed to be the word of God, buttressed by the law. The Judaic system assumed that food contained within it the manifestations for holiness and commanded human beings that they should not only eat, but they should be satisfied. Okay, and the phrase is, "V'achalta v'savata," you should eat, but you should be satisfied. So it should be good. In the Jerusalem Talmud, in a particular tractate, human beings were warned that in the final judgment, that is in some great day at the end of time, and that final judgment that would take place in the world to come, they would be punished if they had failed to partake of some good food which their eyes had seen. Okay, Gittin, another section of the Talmud dealing with the laws of divorce, allowed a man to institute divorce proceedings against his wife if she burnt the soup, okay, thereby hampering him in his enjoyment of food. From biblical sources through the most modern, Jewish writings throb with the notion that there was a linkage between food and happiness, between good food and good life, and this defined Jewish ideas of consumption. The examples in Jewish texts are legion. Let's offer two biblical examples of this. Students who were in my class certainly heard some of these before. In the story of the Exodus, Moses met his fiercest opposition from the children of Israel just liberated from slavery when they got hungry, okay, as they were journeying through the desert. The place they were going to go to was a land limitless of, quote, milk and honey, fruit, grain, and oil, and the people complained, quote, "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons and the leek and the garlic." Rather than chiding them for being fixated on food, God pacified them with manna, a kind of neutral substance which flowed from the heavens, and that manna tasted however anybody wanted to. So had they known about chocolate, it probably would have tasted like chocolate. They couldn't have known about chocolate yet. So to another prophecy, a prophecy of the days to come in the book of Isaiah, the prophet foretold a moment in time when the Lord of hosts will make for all people a feast of fat things, a feast of wine, of fat things full of marrow. In the Jewish home, regardless of century or continent, the Friday night table ushering in the Sabbath was defined, the table itself was defined as an altar. Okay, it was referred to as a mikdash ma'at, a miniature temple, a reenactment of the table in Jerusalem. The food served on it, Jewish writings tell us, represented the sacrifices made in ancient times. By eating their Sabbath meal, every Jewish family could pretend that they were performing on and at their own homey table a reenactment of the days before exile. The preparation and consumption of food informed Judaism and Jewish ritual practice, shaping what food could be eaten and what could not. Jewish law prescribed what should be done before and after the consumption of food, calling for different blessings for different categories of food. Fruit grown on a vine required one blessing, while fruit grown from a tree required a different one. Food from under the earth necessitated its own special words. The elaborate laws of kashrut, of the kosher laws, divided the world into the edible and the inedible. Complicated strictures determined what foods could be eaten when, how, and with what. Some foods always lay beyond the permissible. Pork and the flesh of any other animal that didn't chew its cud and have cloven hooves, and fish that did not have fins and scales. These were treif. Okay, they were forbidden. But other foods, we might say, traveled from permissible and forbidden. For example, a pat of butter might be absolutely fine, if one could afford it, on a piece of bread at one time of the day, and utterly unacceptable at another time if consumed too close to the eating of meat. Bread underlay the Jewish diet of Eastern Europe, and eating it, in fact, always required a special blessing. But 8 days out of the year, during Passover, a minute crumb of bread could pollute Jewish space. Dietary laws obligated all Jews, regardless of age, sex, or class, to know what they ate, how they ate it, where they got it from, very much in tune with the slow food movement, okay, who produced it, okay, and to always understand that what they ate derived from the intentions of God, who commanded them to eat or not eat particular items. Each and every ordinary homey object connected to the preparation and eating of food throbbed with sanctity or throbbed with potential danger. Pots and pans and spoons and forks, tables and sinks, bowls and boards were terribly important. As the guardians of their own bodies and souls and of those of their families and communities, Jews had a role to play in keeping sanctity in and pollution out, very Mary Douglas, from the private world of their home to the public world of the community. Knowledge of the anatomy of cows and chickens, care in the treatment of bowl glasses versus wooden ones, constituted sacred information. Rabbis, usually the most educated people in their community, spent time and derived authority from knowing all this kitchen stuff. Okay, a rabbi, somebody who had studied for years, indeed studied his entire life to learn the law, had to not only know important ideas, but also had to know about crockery and cutlery and pieces of food, determining what Jews could and could not put in their mouths. Men supervised the communal preparation of food. Rabbis, slaughterers, and butchers formed a communal chain of command, with rabbis the ultimate judge. But ordinary women in their homes, alone with the aid of servants if they could afford it, or husbands deeply invested in the process, also inspected and judged food. They usually spotted the problems first. As their families' cooks, these women stood as the sentinels of the kosher system. They could choose to ignore a problem if they wanted, nobody would know, or they could expose the problem and act accordingly. In their hands lay the integrity of the system. Home and community functioned as overlapping spaces. The housewife in her kitchen and the community leaders in their formal institutional bodies created community through food. Because Jewish communities and Judaism invested so much importance in what got eaten, they venerated food. People brought up in this world constantly talked and wrote and commented about food as a marker of who they were. Now, I wanted to use this talk as a launch to the papers that you're going to hear, each one taking a very particular episode in the Jewish past. Each one will show us how food mattered, how food made history. Yes, the great developments of Jewish history, the writing of the Talmud, the creation of other great ideas, expulsions, regime changes, migrations to places of new opportunity. These mattered too, and they made Jewish food. But on the other hand, Jewish food made that history possible. Thank you.